Nanyosha mikono yangu juu, naisifu nchi yangu maarufu. Nanyosha mikono yangu juu, naisifu nchi yangu maarufu. Hello, hello Tanzania.
Nano racket. Now we have a graphene racket. This is the head racket.
What's the difference between nano and graphene?
Sorry?
What is nano, what is graphene?
What is nano, what is graphene? It's different scales. Different scales. So this is the, I do actually have one of these rackets. It's interesting that the head, the manufacturer, sold 250,000 of these rackets the first year. So there's a bit of marketing here, there's a bit of technology. Probably marketing probably was the most important thing. We have a new hockey stick now, graphene in it. We have a new helmet. Now these are sporting applications, but no surprises, because the first people who accept or exploit new materials are sporting goods. When we saw it with carbon fibre, it's exactly the same with graphene as well. So, I just want to talk briefly. This is the National Graphene Institute, which Helen and Hank and Omar saw last week. We're just about to move in. It'll be ready officially in 3 months, but we'll be moving in next month. This is a $100 million investment the UK has made in Europe into graphene. A significant investment. I guess from a policy perspective, why does it matter? Well, it's a significant decision this government actually made. They could have taken this $100 million and they could have spread it throughout the UK, but they decided to put it in one place to develop critical mass. And that's a key point. Because this will only be successful if you get people to interact with it, to commercialise it. Now, if you're a company and you don't want to spend a week going through all the papers and who do I need to talk to, you want to go to one place, have it all under one roof. Manchester, graphene, and that's the whole point of this. Critical mass, leverage. You know, one of the things we have at the moment is not just the UK, but Europe now. We have the €1 billion graphene flagship, €1 billion. We have also large European projects as well, and graphene as well. Again, this provides the leverage, the critical mass, the centre. And we don't do everything in Manchester. We're hub and spoke. We work with other centres in the UK, in Europe, across the globe. So this is probably the more.
Why is that building unique?
Sorry?
Why is that building nowhere else?
It's the size of the clean rooms, the fact that I'll explain it in the next graph. Actually, probably better. So this is something called the technology readiness level scale, or manufacturing capability readiness level. So there are various variations of it throughout the world, but the principles still remain the same. So this came from NASA 30 or 40 years ago, because like graphene, nothing is ever new. It's just reinvented in some way. But it's an interesting concept from a policy perspective. And basically you have 9 key segments divided into 3. 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 11. So this is where universities sit. This is where your centres, your academic excellence. This is where it all sits at the front end. Most academics go to 3. They write their paper. That's their bottom line. They've done their bit now. Now they move on to the next research subject. So all this fantastic science, what do they do with it? Well, nothing, because that's not what they're paid to do. Meanwhile, industry's up here, thinking to themselves, well, how do I get down to see this great technology? How do I actually work with it? You got this bit in the middle. It's called capital. So it's called capital for a reason. Hopefully you'll see why in a minute. This is called the valley of death. So this is where commercialization happens. So in most places in the world, you've got this and you've got that. You don't have this bit in the middle. But this is where it happens. This is where you scale up. This is where your process is validated. This is where you bring the supply chain together. This is where you try it first of all. This is when it actually works. Does it work or does it not work? You get it wrong here by jumping from there to there. It's gonna cost you a lot of money. So this is all about management of risk. Okay? Factor difference between there and there is probably 100. There are lots of case studies where companies have tried to go from there to there without doing the bit in the middle, and they've really gone bust. And very public companies. So this is key. So we have in the UK these catapult centres, and the whole point is to build the bridge between science and production. So in the UK, these catapult centres are primarily government funded. We were talking to Omar on Friday. It's interesting that some parts of the world, they see this as being an enterprise model. So the emphasis is on the company to do this. In the UK, it's a government pump priming. And this has been a key element in it. So why are they doing this? Well, if you just look from an economic point of view, in terms of jobs created, jobs safeguarded, investment, the one that I worked with, for every pound invested in that building and infrastructure, it will generate nearly 45 pounds return in gross value added to the economy. So that's the difference. So it's a no-brainer, really. You know, you think about why have we not done it before? And the reason why they haven't done it before is because there's been no mechanism to do this. Okay? So from a graphene perspective, here we have universities. This is generally where we are. We're still at this early stages where we're still making things like that. You know, but again, you know, can you scale this up into something significant? And then we have the National Graphene Institute, which takes beyond the next stage. So this is where your scale up happens. Can you do these things? Can you actually make it bigger and better? You know, what if you do this? What if you do that? But it's where industry comes together. Technology push is great, but market pull is what you need. It has to be two things. It has to be technology push, market pull. We have many companies that come to see us in Manchester, and they sit in front of the Nobel laureate and say to them, "Can you make this?" And he says, "Of course not. You know, I can tell you the physics of the material, but I can't make it." So a lot of people don't understand what universities do, and this is a key point. You know, industry needs to work with universities to actually find the application. That's a key part of the commercialization process. It's not just a technology push. It has to actually work with industry itself.
Ivan, can you just tell us, my site's unsmart, can you tell us what's written on the yellow, green and blue mountains?
Yes, this is universities, catapult centres, industry.
Thanks, Alan.
Okay. So the idea is, so why do you do this? And I always use the example of Rolls-Royce aero engines in Derby. Rolls-Royce cannot stop their production line to try something new. You imagine to try something new, they have to stop the whole production line, they have to pull out everything and do it. It just wouldn't work. It just wouldn't. So they need centres to try something different. But they also need centres where you actually share the risk with the supply chain, with the universities. So this is not one step at a time here. This is an iterative circle that keeps going back all the time. Because each time they move further up, and this is the point, this is the pre-production. This is when you actually got it. You've got it working and you go, right, I'm just going to lift it straight out into a building from the catapult centre straight into the production. That's it. Management risk. But these things happen all the time. There are always problems occurring. So some people think, well, once it gets to there, universities don't do anything. But that's actually wrong. Actually, more research is generated. So it keeps going. So here we are in the National Graphene Institute, which I'm pleased to say is nearly completed, which is fantastic. But then, just about 3 months ago, we had another announcement of a further 100 million investment in graphene. So this $100 million investment, half of which has come from Abu Dhabi. Okay, the other half from government as well. So you see now, we've pushed it up closer to industry. So now not only do we have the academic, we have the scale up, now we have the pre-production. Now who occupies these different parts? Well, all this is engineers. This is where this is where it happens. Scientists are not engineers. Okay? They play a key part of the process. They're not engineers. Engineers that make this happen. And here's another little thing which I found out about 6 months ago, which never really appeared before. Academic engineers are not the same thing as industrial engineers. Okay? An academic engineer probably hasn't done anything for the last 20 or 30 years. Doesn't know how to turn this into a product. That's a key point. So industry have to feel comfortable working in this environment, have to feel comfortable working with academia. Again, but this is engineers. This is where it actually happens. This is the exciting part. Okay. So you can see now it's moved further up. So then who we got at the moment, we have one strategic partner, two strategic partners, we have lots of companies, and the last time I spoke to you, we have probably got about 35, 36 companies now working in graphene at Manchester. As I said earlier, it's not just a case now of one university now, there are lots of universities throughout the world now. It's a case now of who's not working in graphene. And things have moved on very quickly. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Why Syngenta?
Oh, Syngenta. Okay, well that's an interesting one. So Syngenta are working with us on a graphene sensor. It's a very interesting project. So their technology is based upon prediction. So they have developed a sensor that they can put on a crop, and they can identify any problems in terms of locus or whatever way before the actual infestation actually happens. Through the sensor. You have to remember, a graphene sensor, it can measure one molecule. One molecule can make all the difference. You can see, so they measure the insect, they've looked at the insect, they can do certain things, changing chemicals, they can do things with this material. So Miguel, I think that's about it really. I don't think there's much more. Oh, here's an interesting one. Sorry, I don't know if we...
Was that little South Korean young girl? Do you have that?
Oh, but I can't show it on the video. That's a video, so I can't show it. So, just when we thought there was lots of things, you know, and graphene, and what to say, one of the interesting things is that Bill Gates decided that
You didn't
graphene.
say what is graphene, what is graphite.
What is graphene? Well, graphene comes from graphite. Graphene is more solid.
So if I have a lot of graphite,
Yes, if you have a lot of graphite, you know, clearly supply, and one of the things we talked about on Friday was about, you know, certainly there are parts of Africa, particularly ones which have got large stocks of graphite. You know, how do you add value to that graphite for this particular market? Okay. So, but the interesting thing about, now we're going beyond graphene now. Now we just don't have this one two-dimensional material. We have lots of two-dimensional materials. So what you now do, and again coming back to how the world works, there are very few materials out there that determine what we'd actually do. You know, silicon, steel, aluminium, those are the main bulk materials. And then what you do when you actually put them together, composites, then you can do different other things, but you still need a wider range of properties. So what we have now, we can develop single layer materials, and we can build new composite materials, layer by layer, layer by layer. So eventually you got something where you have multifunctionality. You can have a material, paint, where you can have a sensor at the top, you can have a solar cell, you can have a transistor, an interconnector, reinforcement multiplier, all in one material. Well, nature can't do this. Well, when I say this is sticky tape stuff. No, that's fine. Scientists love this, and you scale this up into something. So the potential is there to do other things, and you know, we're now seeing new paradigms in terms of transistors, solar cells, many different devices now. So we're going beyond graphene, we're going to other things as well. So just quickly, the last point. Kylie Minogue, hopefully most people will have recognised who that is. So why have I put that up there? They did an article a few years ago about careers our children will be doing in the future. So we have things like virtual architect, avatar, stylist, active makeup developer. Number 4, graphene engineer. Thank you. Thank you.
you did tell us what is a graphene engineer. I think that takes us very easily to Kelly Minogue that was wearing something. Yeah, like probably it goes to wearable technology. You go ahead. Yeah?
Thanks, Ivan. Can you go back to the graphic with the 3 mountains and
The catapult.
Okay, you said there were no standards, but then you still need the standards to support the process at the
You
end
do.
of the day. Where in that scheme would the standards fall,
Here.
and what investment, you spoke about the investments in the other areas, but what investment out of all that money that you get is going into, for instance, the work that would have to be done by BSI?
Dan, that's a good question. None of it's to do with standards. None of it. But just recognise that one of the biggest obstacles we've got in this market is standards. So I saw where I started, BSI where I started, we're working with NPL. So we're doing this anyway.
I saw NPLs last week.
We're doing this anyway because we have to do it, because this market's not going to happen. No big company is going to look at graphene unless the standards. They won't need to know. So as part of what we're doing in Manchester, we have people working on standards. Okay, standards take 5 or 6 years ago to really establish. But companies want things now. They want to characterize. They want to know, is this the right graphene? Is it graphene at all? You know, how do we actually use it?
I think you are stimulating Daniele from ISO.
Oh, good. But it's not just about standards. Many of you will be aware when nanotechnology was first talked about, it was health and safety.
Yeah,
So we're also looking at toxicology.
but it's also a standard.
Yes, in terms of operational method, and in terms of occupational health as well. So it's not just about the possibilities of what it is, how do people work with it as well. So we're doing all these things. And why are we doing it? Because we're trying to accelerate the adoption. If we don't do it, no one will do it. So it's a very, we have a vested interest to make sure that everybody has all the information that they need to make the right decision.
No, but it is the right way, because the specifics of it will come from the industry and the maker.
Yes.
The standards developer only looks at the process of it.
Yeah.
Get to the end.
But the biggest problem is, of course, people think they're using graphene on their own. So they're misinformed as to what material actually is. That's the biggest problem.
Daniele, anything? Come. You've just been at CERN, you had the same question.
Well, I do just a couple of things, in the sense that particularly in this context, there is so my Daniele
So you are
Giordino
behind the pillar.
from ISO, the International Organization of Standardization. Actually, there is an ISO committee that is the Technical Committee 229 on nanotechnology that has, in the past couple of years, taken quite a shift from a number of, I'd say, projects that were very much focused in the past on carbon nanotube, and to move into standardizing things related to graphene, like the world has moved. So in that context, there are quite a number of things moving on. And we've talked recently also with other people. For example, we had recently at the conference Lars Montelius, who is now the Director General of the laboratory in nanotechnology laboratory in Portugal. That's European things, and they're moving in this direction. So there is a number of activities going on in that area, precisely to help standardizing a certain number of things, particularly, I would say, in the domain of test methods and processes that can help stabilize a number of things. That exactly in that context, it is a very good point actually to help to clarify that standards and standardization in the way they see them today, which is quite different from the past, have a crucial role in the Death Valley, actually, to make bridges to pass the Death Valley. This is one example. There are many others, but in particular field, the graphene, which I think is extremely important. There are a lot of things, and probably sometimes the need to how to say, work in the best way, the connections that already are. Just one last comment, it doesn't take 6 years to develop the standards today. That's very important. And
You are on the record.
it can be done in even in some cases in 6 months, but well, in particular cases, but even in general terms, it can be much faster and adapted to the need and the requirements of the communities that are interested in that.
And there, so you just mentioned the key.
So wearable technology is really, it's in its infancy, and it's interesting, and I'm just going to give just a brief overview of what is interesting, what is happening, and what are some of the questions that are being discussed. So there's a lot of hype associated with wearable tech that is supposed to change your life. now the projected market for wearable devices, I think the PricewaterhouseCoopers estimates is going to be about 70 billion by 2018. The way that we do everything is somehow going to change. A lot of money is being poured into the area. It's not clear quite what it's going to do. So where are we now is some very clear-cut applications. So for example, something that you might have seen is the Fitbit. It's a device with an accelerometer that can count how much you've moved and how active you have been today. This is a wellness type of device that in principle could be something everybody would use. There are some great, very clear-cut applications like a tracker that would help old people that live perhaps alone. If something happens to them, it would alert friends and family. Similar devices might be something that is for people with high blood pressure or diabetics to control their condition. Again, very clear applications. Also safety, this device here keeps track of your kids, so you won't lose them. This is where we are now. It's either rather niche applications. I mean, there are a lot of kids, but not all of us want to track our kids. So, and there are situations where you really put a tracker or a computer on somebody, and that makes it rather narrow where things are. The vision for wearables is supposed to be bigger than that. So where could it be? So Google Glass. Google Glass is basically a computer you put on your head. You see through the camera, and you look around almost as normal, not really, but you basically can, instead of looking at your phone, you can have the information projected in front of you, in the air. Again, it's very useful for specific applications. So, for example, a surgeon might use a Google Glass during a surgery to get information and give information about what is going on, say with a specialized surgeon somewhere else, or somebody else they need to connect to. Virgin Atlantic is trying them out, so when you're a business class passenger, you can come in and they will go, hello, Mr. So-and-so, this is your favorite seat, because the information is shown in front of you. Again, this is really specialized use. Where, again, in a way you have your phone in front of your eyes. This is what it does. What does it do in the future? The main question is interpersonal relations. If you were to wear something that puts added information on you all the time, how will you relate to people around you? Similar, the Apple Watch, again, is basically your phone on your wrist, combined with basically the Fitbit. It keeps track of your bodily state, and it gives you that information. The main question in here is this wearables or is this a computer on your wrist? What exactly do you have? You would expect that wearables will take us somewhere beyond having a computer on a wrist. The main direction that is being discussed is connecting wearable technology with the Internet of Things. I assume that most of you have heard something about the Internet of Things. The basic idea is that you can be connected, but actually that stuff can be connected. Instead of your computer being connected to the Internet, my chair can be connected to the Internet, and the whereabouts of the chair can be known. The chair can have sensors on it, so it has its own set of sensors, and that can become very useful. So for example, I'm sure you can't see anything, this lady here says that her first Internet of Things project was a tutorial to help monitor the energy consumption of her home. This is presumably by putting a lot of sensors around the house. These people helped to make a program that is a soil monitoring device that can be used by farmers around the world to share data on the quality of their soil. This is the second part of the Internet of Things, where the sensors are connected to the Internet and you share that information. It's expected to be extremely powerful, with some ginormous 50 billion or more devices connected to the Internet, and it has, not to the Internet anymore, to the Internet of Things, whatever that system is going to be. So it has its own problems of standards and connectivity and data analytics, but it can be very powerful. So here the idea would be that since you have essentially the wearable is going to be some form of computer on you that naturally collects data, that data can be transmitted. And it's going to be amazing to have data on so many people and what people do and what people want. Or at least that is the theory, because of course it is the Internet of Things, but if I'm wearing a computer, I'm not a thing. So it's not, I'm not an Amazon parcel you're going to be sending me around, or you want to keep track of me. So what exactly is the use of being part of the Internet of Things for a person? So the area that is coming in here is the notion of empathic computation. Basically, as humans, we understand the way that we connect to the world and to other humans through empathy of one way or another. Here, the form of empathy that is envisioned is one where the connected devices around you, the smart devices around you, either the ones you wear or the ones you interact with, know things, and know things about you. And therefore, because they know things about you, they can communicate with you the way that you want them to. They can offer you things before you thought that you want them. Or at the very least, it can be, I mean, I think that some part of this is very sensible. It can be very convenient. It can be a way to deal with the information overload that at this point technology is giving us, if the technology itself can sort through this information.
It may tell you now you need to take a glass of water.
Yes, it might tell you because it might tell you need a glass of water because it measures that you need a glass of water, or because it knows that this is about the time you usually have a glass of water, so here is one for you. Or your friends have a glass of water. So these are the usual ways. Now, there is a lot of debate on what this is going to do. So this is again from this year's PricewaterhouseCoopers report on wearable future, the basic matrix of possibilities. I'll read it out. So here you have social benefits and personal benefits and net positive impact, good options for the future or bad options for the future. The ideal positive vision for what this could do is crowd-based social change. So for example, all this data would be fantastic for people that do complex systems. They would have lots of social data, real social data, to actually make proper analytics. And then that can be used by governments and decision makers to make decisions. And for yourself, you could use wearables to help you with your bad habits or to adopt a new behavior. You would become accountable, if you like, to the technology around you because you chose to do so. The negative things people worry about, of course, I'm sure that you're very familiar with the everyone is watching and privacy concerns. But also the fact that this might all turn into basically an annoyance. If all of that stuff knows things or is proactive, if it doesn't get it right, it's going to be really annoying. And ultimately this is one issue with going in the empathic direction, that your device can do a lot of things right, but if they make one mistake, it will become obvious that they're a machine that is annoying you. And humans are naturally very unforgiving. But there's another direction that is, again, research is happening, is basically cutting edge research at the university level with extremely direct applications in the world of wearables. This is basically the sense of self and research on interoception and basically the physiopsychology, the way that our understanding of our own somatic markers affect the way that we feel. Like you can go back, the ideas here go back to William James and his thought of, is my heart racing because I'm scared, or am I scared because my heart is racing? And actually it's a feedback loop. If something starts your heart racing, you will get anxious and then react accordingly. So basically your sense of self is created both by your body and by your brain. There are many factors that go into this. And when you have wearables, meaning an active technology on you, then there is a potential to actually affect your sense of self and what your body is, because your body is naturally extended to include what you put on it. Let me give you an example of this, still at the level of the research, and then we can guess about how this might become actual technology. Don't know if anybody has seen that. This is a rubber hand illusion. What you do there, this is a setup where the subject sits there, and I have my left hand is behind the screen, so I cannot see it. So in front of me, it's put a fake hand. And what the experimenter does is caress the hand I cannot see, the real one, and the fake exactly the same way. The weird thing is that after the experimenter does that for about 2 minutes, I start thinking this is my hand. It's a very strange effect. If they do that on YouTube, so this is a picture from experiments we were doing. It's spooky, but if somebody then hits that hand, then you think it's going to hurt. You generally think something bad is going to happen to you. What's going on behind this is your brain is trying to integrate inputs from different senses. So there is, you see a hand where you expect your hand should be, and you feel what you're looking at. And our brains have mechanisms to integrate senses. So when you walk down the street and you hear the horn of a car, and you know it's that car, what's happening is that your brain is integrating what you hear with what you're looking at. These are systems that you can actually fool, which is what you're doing here. And the question which is interesting, and this is what we're developing, except I can't show you what we're developing because it's not in the market yet, is trying to find ways to actually make these things happen. And if you like, extend what your body is, which is a natural place, I believe, for wearables to go. Of course, without the creep factor of this. And the idea basically is that once the wearables can be part of ourselves, then the empathy that the Internet of Things can afford us can start making sense and come all together. So this is where we're now. This is what might be happening, and hopefully not too far in the future.
Great.
Thank you, Bodhi. I think this is simply, if we could a little bit kind of trying to differentiate between Ivan's kind of progress that he gave us since Dar es Salaam about 1.5 years ago, and this is simply an introduction. And there is a whole kind of completely new area, both around the wearable, but also around the Internet of Things as well. And it's not as simple as we listened. Fortini and I, we try to agree that we reach a point where we simply test if you are interested, so that by the time we go to our international smart partnership dialogue, we are going to have the number of facets about, including the science behind, which you haven't seen here, except the excitement about it. So I wanted actually, we tempted somebody in Somerset House, which did that dress with the feathers, which they liked when I come and they tell everybody if I like you or don't. So I'm sorry I couldn't bring her here, but there are a number of this sort of wearable technology applications already, and of course there is complexity and systems behind, and quite a lot of completely new science of design, and including behavioral and psychology. It is quite a complex new area, but nevertheless it attracted industry or market quicker. I mean, everybody probably went to Science Museum. You could buy some watches, which are those that she just Fortini has on the screen. But now, very quick. Thank you, Fortini.
Fischer-Tropsch technology. Now, Fischer-Tropsch is well-established technology. It's a technology to transform, to convert low-value hydrocarbons into high-value hydrocarbons. And the low value can be biomass, waste, or natural gas you can't sell it remote or so, or small field. And high value products are kerosene and diesel, and then top quality products. So that's the idea. And this technology has been around for a long time. In Malaysia there's since 20-30 years running on a remote gas field, making base oils, lubricants out of it. And you probably know about big factories in Qatar. Shell and Sasol have big factories there, transforming natural gas they can't sell into kerosene and diesel. Also in Nigeria is a big plant, and these plants are huge. They are talking about 100,000 barrels a day, costing about 10 to 20 billion dollars. So that's big. Yeah? So what's new about this technology? New is that it is now possible to do small scale. Think small. And small is about, say, 1,000 barrels a day. And that opens up a whole new world of opportunities. And that might be relevant for quite a number of countries, also particularly the African countries. So, yeah, and this technology is now commercializing. And now the first commercial plants are being developed. For instance, there's one in the United States on biomass, making lube oil out of biomass. The very interesting one here at Heathrow, the waste from British Airways is transformed, converted into kerosene that British Airways will use in their airplanes, so you will fly clean and green. And there are a number of factories, plants, being developed in the States on the use of shale gas. Shale gas often are relatively small fields. If you are not close to a pipeline, it's very difficult to sell it, because how do you transport gas? So then it's easy to convert, better to convert it into diesel or kerosene that you can transport by road. Yeah, and so there are a number of projects now commercializing. And this could be of interest in a number of countries. And for instance, in Uganda it could be very useful for the associated gas that will be around if projects develop commercially. Nigeria could be very interested in flare gas here. Flare gas is small, so it could be used here. Mozambique is talking about a very big project, Session2 project, 100,000 barrels a day for a big gas field. But it could be very interesting for the remote gas fields as well, transport. So that are the sort of opportunities that are emerging. Big opportunities. So is all the good news? Is the bad news? Yes, there are limitations. It's still a fairly expensive process. Yeah, you're talking about investment of $100,000 per barrel. So for 1,000 tons per day, that today is still 100 million. It's compared to 10 billion, it's small, it's still sizable. It's still a fairly complex technology, so operating in a remote area, what you would like to do, this has the opportunity that you produce sort of locally or remote areas, high value products that could reduce the imports and support local developments. It's still a problem to have a complex technology in a remote area. So the size reduction is substantial, and here I have to make two apologies at the end. First of all, for the first time when I gave a presentation here, I listened to Michael, I didn't use slides. Yeah, all the others do. And of course then I could have shown you the difference in size. Yeah, the pictures here. Basically the reactor of Session2 technology used to be the size of a small cathedral. And now 2 or 3 reactors will fit into this room. So it's a size of 100 times smaller. That's the major difference. The second apology I have to make is that although I try to be as objective and unbiased as possible, I do have a bit of a bias. Think Smaller, this folder gives you a bit of information about small scale Session2 technology, but this is not from one specific company, Flossis, that is I think leading in this field, but there are a number of companies operating in this field, Velocities, Compact, GTL, immersion fuel technologies. Yeah, but I happen to be a non-executive director of this company, so I could have used this folder. If you are interested, I have a few copies with me. Thank you.
Look at most of the Nobel Prize winners that are coming out in physics, chemistry and medicine. It's nearly all associated with nano. Forget Andy Murray. Another application of nano that you may have seen, this is the new centre at St Pancras, where the Euro train takes off now. The roof of that is actually nanotechnology. It's the coating on the glass that doesn't get dirty. You know, it'd be a hell of a job cleaning that glass. And the way it works is the dirt lands on the glass. This is old technology, really. It's been out for probably 15 years now. UV light hits that dirt, and titanium dioxide, which hasn't shown up on this slide, is the 35 nanometer thick layer on the glass. That breaks down the dirt. So next time it rains, it washes off. So in future St Pancras station there will be nice and clean. Not only is it working for breaking down dirt, it will break down effluents as well. So if you've got this titanium dioxide in cement or in paving slabs, that sort of thing, it will break down what's called the NOx and the SOx, the nasty pollutants that come out of your exhaust pipes in your cars. And that's actually found application in a high street in our Lake District, where they like to be nice and green and clean. And these slabs are now called NOXA, paving slabs. There's a lot happening in solar energy, of course. You see that in the press all the time. I look after a number of UK government projects which are going down to that nano level, instead of having the thick silicon materials. And I put this one up. Each year they've had this.
You were preparing that for South African dialogue, right?
Yeah. Each year they have this solar challenge. It's actually 4,218 kilometres from Pretoria to Cape Town, and the one that won it actually won by 1,496. It was a bit of a walkover. But there was something like 15 or so vehicles in there. But in future, those panels will be at the nano level, and we'll see those coming out fairly soon. If you go on the web, you can find lots of inventories saying all about the new nano products, and it cuts across everything. It's in appliances, automotive, there's cross-cutting ones, electronics and computers. That's where there's going to be major changes going on. Food and beverage, I'll say a wee bit about that. Goods for children, health and fitness, and home and garden applications. Tons of applications now at that nano level. And here's one or two that I picked up. This part here is an instrument for running over your car windscreen, and it will stop the flies that hit the windscreen actually sticking to the glass. Wow. Yeah, we need those in Africa for sure. A bit more mundane is that one. It's a nano cream that helps the ladies look a lot more beautiful than they are already. Where there's nasal sprays with silver nanoparticles in. Well, there's a whole host of different applications. I think that's the nasal spray one, sorry. Let's see from here. The guy sitting on the coat there, I've got clothing that is nano-coated. It has a thin nano layer of Teflon on it, and nothing sticks to it. You can go into Asda in the UK and buy these garments for school kids now. You don't have to wash them quite so often. One of the more exciting areas for me is nanosensors, and that's going to cut in across healthcare, pharmaceuticals, agriculture, sensors for food, environment, consumer products, and defence. Every application where you're looking at different sorts of sensors, and I think that was one I took in with the World Bank in Argentina. They were looking at the smell coming off food, and you can detect when the nasty things that are beginning to make the food go off, you can detect those at the molecular level. Graphene's going to change even what I've been talking about at the nano level. As Ivan says, you can detect one molecule. Really exciting stuff. So it's going to be able to detect diseases actually before they've got a hold on your body. And the implications of that in hospitals is quite marked. Food contamination, whether food's going off, whether it's got salmonella, listeria, pollutants in it. Trace explosives for airports. All of these things are now currently being worked on, and any other environmental pollutants as well. These are things that are so sensitive and very selective, and also very specific for different contaminants. There's one that I've shown this one before. It's a diabetes test, which is down at that nano level now. Another load of products. When I saw that textiles was getting mentioned, the wearable stuff, I put this one down. I've actually got, I don't know whether Mikhailo will give me time, but I've got some filter papers, pop them into a beaker of water, and it jumps out.
I think I have it here, the picture.
Oh.
But let's show it over lunch.
Okay.
So that we'll show it over lunch.
And that's all it's got. It feels like the clothing, it still feels like cotton, but it's got this very, very thin layer of Teflon, and that's the same with that.
What happens if you sweat? Does it jump off you?
Well, there is an application there as well, and I think that's on the next bit. Yeah. You can get underpants, which won't let you smell if you do get sweaty. I didn't show the one of, was it 2 years ago, one of the shuttles went up, and the Japanese guy wore the same underpants for 40 days. Because if you're going to Mars or wherever, you need to have not too much weight. So the silver nanoparticles in those fabrics will actually kill the bugs. That jacket of mine there, it's goose down. You can't wash goose down, it goes all lumpy and horrible. That coat doesn't need washing. I'll shout over. It's got the surface on it that throws any dirt away, and on the inside it's got silver nanoparticles in the fabric so it doesn't smell. You don't have to wash it ever.
But it's true that they haven't been able to reproduce a goose feather.
Another application here, going back to the Nobel Prize winners, that was 2011 for discovery of quasicrystals, changing metals is basically what they were up to. And that's now finding application at that nano level in a variety of different pieces of equipment. Flexible, very strong. So, this face mask, going back to this silver nanoparticles face mask, that might come in handy for the Ebola problems. That's tooth fillings, much stronger, lasts a lot longer. 3M again with putting surfaces onto windows to either keep the heat in, things like that. Packaging, I mentioned food before. You want packaging that's going to keep the oxygen out. Keep the water out, but then on the contrary you want to keep the moisture in there that's there already. You don't want it drying out, and you don't want to lose the flavour.
There are limitless potentials, right?
Yes. Yeah. All right, I'll skip on that and take it.
Because the whole point is simply to signal further than in the last few years.
Yeah.
Nano developments.
This was an application with mangoes that they're putting nano levels of material on the surface, which makes them stay fresher a lot longer, and that can be applied to a lot of fruits. Well, one of the more interesting ones I was thinking about Zimbabwe. It's got a hell of a lot of lithium product that they could be doing things with, and lithium batteries. If you go down to the lithium at the lithium products at the nano level, you get much more energy. They last a lot longer as well, and there's lots of different things happening with cars now. Okay.
Actually, NECF, Norman and Musita, NECF has been promoting the smart partnership type of application of nano with Scientific Industrial Research Development Center. So maybe you come in the afternoon to relate to where are we with that.
That's the final one. This is purification of water. Nano products are now being used. Variety of different companies. You can suck up dirty water through one of these filters, and by the time it gets to your mouth, it's nice clean water. Implications of that are pretty good for developing countries.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Development of application of high-performance computing. I'll be very brief, especially in the area of education and health, even though they are very interesting in high-frequency trading for those people who are interested with finance.
Moses, I know you're hungry, but could you speak a bit louder?
From the presentation that I had today, I had things like collective intelligence, which is very good. Getting more information from different kind of people and analyzing them to get the patterns. Internet of Things is very nice. In supercomputing, we depend on data to processing them so that they can be very interesting. I'm going to present on radiotherapy because there have been advancements in the treatment of cancer. There is a center in Prague which specializing in photon therapy, where there are processes that have been used before for diagnosis and things like that, that we are going to be improved so much with a high-performance computing. And those processes like 3D and 4D imaging, the processing part of it, inverse treatment planning, and Monte Carlo radiation dose calculations. The advancement in the part of this processing in terms of processing the data has been very tremendous, and the treatment of cancer have been improved so much now because of that. Another area that I'm doing researching on is on designing of supercomputer that is going to be affordable, small enough, that can be distributed to not only universities all over the world, if possible, all classes of the students that they have applications that demand supercomputing. The research that we've done, such a kind of supercomputer, which is very portable, can be as small as that, can be below in price for $1,000 or below. It's very cheap. It can be an entry supercomputing facility for students. I know it's not going to be feasible to be distributed to all the students, but it's feasible to be distributed at least to a class that people that will be studying high-performance computer. And University of Southampton here, they have designed one of them. We call that class of supercomputer micro high-performance supercomputers. They're micro not because they're not powerful, but because of size and affordability. So those two areas are areas which they have gained more prominence now in high-performance computing. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much. Very.
For me, simply to leverage. Rather, when we were in Tanzania, we were talking about leveraging technology for socio-economic transformation. And I tried to make it simple to say, what kind of technology do you require? And just to make it simple, let's say that you need only just 4 groups of basic, what I call the critical technologies for socio-economic transformation. Technologies for basic needs, water, food, dwellings, technologies for quality of life, how to improve our life every day, technologies for wealth creation, and technologies for good governance. What we heard this morning could be technologies for wealth creation, but it's also technologies for quality of life, and in case of graphene, it's also actually basic needs, because graphene has qualities to improve supply of new energy. So if you put it that way, these are the things you have to leverage in order to make socio-economic transformation. But to do that, what do you need? You need what I call the total national capacity in STI. And what are these total national capacity? It's simply a government that recognizes the crucial role of STI in achieving socio-economic transformation. There are many governments that talk about science and technology, but they don't really believe in, because they do not put enough resources in science and technology. So one that recognizes, and then of course is committed to providing a comprehensive physical and soft infrastructure for STI. And then of course you need a scientific community ethical and competent, able to contribute and draw from the global pool of science and technological knowledge. Now, then you need a private sector that can create wealth out of technology. Then you need a society, I put there as science literate. But I heard the new term, a society that is at ease with science and technology. And not in many of our countries, the society is not at ease with science and technology. And then of course an efficient governance system. To achieve that, this is where it is a very, very complex system here. It involves politicians, so it's become very, very complex. So to move that, you require a lot of effort and you require smart partnership. Every one of these has got to have the same kind of objective. And this is what smart partnership is all about. Now, now to relate to all this, this is just summing that up. This is the total national capacity we talked about earlier. You need this to leverage the critical technology, and you can achieve that. But you need holistic human capital development, and you need manpower, and of course you need smart partnership, just to put that in context of what we are doing here.
Okay, but the battery's going to charge.
We'll come back to this later. I just want to from my perspective of policy, which is in the book that you can see up there, if you talk about a government that recognizes the critical role of STI, and like I said earlier, in terms of science policy, this is policy for STI. Or rather, it's STI for policy. In other words, this is you need STI in order to, the government must believe that you need that STI can achieve the policy, and of course the government has to put its resources into policy. So STI for policy, policy for STI. The scientific community, of course, it is policy for STI, and the private sector is STI, and how you bring private sector into policy, into the policy fabric. And then the society, of course, is STI, and the community, international collaboration, and STI governance. This part of it is what I call the essential templates for science policy. I'm trying to come to this, to what Mahela was trying to start earlier, which is about science advice. Now, to make whatever we say just now to happen, you need the people to make this happen. And the first thing about the people is, of course, you need champion. The champion can be a person, the champion can be an institution, and the champion can be an organization. A country that has got the number one, the king, or the president, or the prime minister who believe in STI, you have a better chance of making things happen. But if he doesn't, then of course it will not work. And if we have champions, then the champion will need advice. And we'll come back a little bit to the advice. And then of course you need the people to popularize, you need the planners and managers, you need educators, and you need the practitioners to make this happen. This doesn't apply just to STI, it applies to anything that you want to do. Without this complementarity of people, it will not happen. So you can put this as a kind of framework against which you can say, do I have all this to make whatever I want to do or happen? And then, in our own case, we have been talking about technology management. And what do we mean by technology management? Technology management best practice consists of this following. Political commitment. Whatever you say you want to do for science, you have to integrate that into the overall national development planning. You must have the advisory system. and then you have to have development planning and coordination and so on and so forth. But advisory system is there. And you go back here, advisors is still there. So this is why we think the science advice is very, very important. Now let's look at, when I was in New Zealand, this was the first time they say a meeting of science advisors.
That's at the end of August, right?
Yeah,
So Peter Brookman.
a few months ago.
But Professor Dyer Reddy, just Malcolm, Dyer Reddy was there, yeah? South Africa.
The UK chief scientific advisor was there. The Australian chief scientific advisor was there. The New Zealand was there. My scientific advisor in Malaysia at the moment was also there, and the science advisor to the president of the European Union, Professor Anne Glover. She was there before. She's no longer there now, but she was there at that time. And then they recognize these 4 forms of science advice. An advisory council. I think many of our countries has some kind of an advisory council on science and technology. And then there is the advisory expert committees. Normally when you need some advice on something, you establish a committee or you establish a group. And then of course there is the national science academies, learned societies, and networks. Example of the advice network is the ICSU, IAP, the Inter-Academy Panel, and a few others. And then of course Chief Scientific Advisors, CSA. Some countries have them, some countries do not. In Malaysia, let me blow my horn a little bit, I was the first science advisor appointed by the government. That was during Dr. Mahathir's time as the Prime Minister. And I served him for 16.5 years as science advisor.
But you were part of civil service.
Now
right?
this is of a lighter part during the meeting in New Zealand. The science advisor from Australia stood up and said, during my term as science advisor, I first of all served Prime Minister number 1. Within a short period, Prime Minister number 1 was kicked out, Prime Minister number 2 came in. And then after a short period, Prime Minister number 1 came back in. And now I'm serving Prime Minister number 3 within a few years. And then somebody else came up and said, I served so-and-so for so long, so-and-so for so long. So I said, I served as a science advisor for 16.5 years, but don't feel sorry for me, I serve only 1 Prime Minister. But they didn't know, or they didn't realize that there is another form of science advice which is more powerful than all of that. And what is that? This is something that we invented here. The 5th form of science advice is what I call the smart engagement process through our smart partnership dialogue and think tanking and this kind of meeting that we have. Just to show you how powerful this is. This is how many heads of government are here? Malaysia, Swaziland, Tanzania, Mozambique, and Uganda. And they are sharing experiences on some issues related to leveraging technology for development in Tanzania, and he is from Sri Lanka. Learning through sharing of experiences. And here, again, heads of government there, listening to a subject matter specialist. And that is science advice direct to the ears of the science, of the top leadership. This is a very, very powerful science advice mechanism that we have established without realizing. So I stood up and said, look, there is a fifth method of science advice which we invented. And don't forget that. And this is a very, very powerful thing. So what we have done today, for example, through this smart engagement process, today we learn by getting updates on specific issue from experts, on complex system from Yanir, on graphene from Ivan, and then from and Nano, and also from you, Madam.
Fashionable technology.
Yeah, fashionable. So this is one way we learn, and this is science advice, if you like, in a very, very broad sense. So don't forget about that. What else do I want to say at this stage? But when you talk about science advice, you must not only have the capacity to advise, you must have also the capacity to receive advice. And this is where we fall apart. We put up a science advice system, but we do not necessarily set up the system to receive advice. Where do we go from there? There are different systems in different countries, and there are different blockages in different countries. So we need to look at that. And finally, beware of best practices. Because when you ask an international organization for advice on anything, some expert will come to you and give you the prescription. This is the thing that you need. Whether it's applicable to you or not, it doesn't matter. But this is best practice from whoever sitting in New York or in Paris or wherever it is. And somebody wrote a book and called that best practices. Beware of that. I leave it there.
I think the pathways when one is discussing screening. I've got in the middle here the UK National Screening Committee. They make decisions about whether you introduce a programme for screening, whether you withdraw a programme, and they will influence the government as to whether, give them advice of whether they should introduce one or not. It's a very powerful group which contains the chief medical officers from all the countries, plus a lot of advisors and people in public health and in the relevant fields. Now, before any new programme comes into place, we get requests to screen from public health professionals, a range of people. They then are seen by a group here who are dealing with the policy side, and they will commission an independent policy review based on the science. That review goes back to the policy committee, and then it goes to the National Screening Committee, who will make a decision based on that policy review. The decision goes up there, and then it comes back here and out into the implementation side. And the implementation side is really quite complex, because it involves setting standards for the programme, getting ways in which you can monitor the effectiveness of the programme. You have to implement it, make sure that the quality assurance is there, and that you bring on all the people who are involved in it, and there are lots, health commissioners, or large group of people. Now the example, and in the decision making, the civil servants will feed into the National Screening Committee and to a certain extent to the policy reviews, so they know what's going on and what might be coming up in the future. And they're very much involved in advising politicians and taking the information from the Screening Committee in order that it should be implemented through the NHS, the National Health Service. Now the next slide shows you the example of a condition I've got. It's a condition which you would think would be very simple, but it has actually been incredibly complex. Is it the top one?
Right-hand one.
There. I've taken an example which is an infection called Group B streptococcal infection, called GBS. It's a very common infection, and it's a normal part of it's in most people's digestive gut, or quite a lot. And in pregnant women, you would find probably around 25% of women would carry this bacteria, GBS, and for most of them, it would have no harmful effects at all. It's sort of there in the body in most people. But every year in the country of 700,000 births, there will be about 350, 400 babies born who in fact develop what is called early onset disease, and they acquire this disease during delivery from a mother who is a carrier. So a very small number of babies will develop the disease out of the total population, but the infection can cause very serious illness, sepsis, which is blood poisoning, lung infection, meningitis, and there is a death rate. Most infected babies can be treated and make full recovery, but in a small number it will result in death, particularly in premature babies and in long-term disability. If intravenous antibiotics are given to women, to mothers who carry GBS, this can prevent disease in the newborn. So that is your situation. Now, what do you do about it? How do I go back? There. The dilemma. The dilemma is, should all women in the country be offered screening for this infection? And the time you would do screening would be 35 weeks, because if you do it too late, you don't have the results to be able to give the intravenous antibiotics at delivery. That is a big question. It sounds very simple, really. And the UK National Screening Committee reviewed all the evidence and concluded that screening should not be introduced because, and in fact they've reviewed it twice. They reviewed it in 2008, again in 2012, and they review it again next year. And because of the dilemma, they keep reviewing it. There have been workshops, there have been all kinds of activity going on behind the scenes, but it was quite clear they did not feel it was appropriate, based on the scientific evidence, to introduce it. Because women who screen positive at 35 weeks may not necessarily be carriers at birth. Or if they're not negative, they might be carriers at birth. It's a bacteria which comes and goes. The test does not identify which women are at risk of having a baby who will get disease. And that's what screening programs are about, to pick up the woman who has a high risk of having the disease. It means thousands of women would be given intravenous antibiotics unnecessarily, when they wouldn't be at risk. You'd have to hospitalise the birth to give the intravenous antibiotics, and there's a lot of concern about the overuse of antibiotics in relation not only to anaphylaxis, the reactions to the antibiotics, but also to resistance. And this is a global issue at the moment. It would not prevent infection in premature babies because the screening would be after they're already born, and that is where 2/3 of the deaths are. And the long-term effects of antibiotics in the newborn, I think, are the subject of increasing concern. So this is in a way the unknown. You can't quantify it, but there's definitely a view there that that could be a problem. So the decision not to screen, but the decision not to screen has been contested by a very strong lobby. Now, the lobby are the screening advocates, have been incredibly powerful, and they're lobbying MPs. There are a lot of questions in Parliament, even the Prime Minister's been involved. It's been a really complex process. The poor civil servants have been absolutely trying to deal with the issue. There's been an awful lot of work, discussion at the screening committee, how you overcome it. There's been a lot of work funded to try and look at some of the issues. And of course the media plays a wonderful role here in trying to support the advocacy. So it's very hard actually to come up with a conclusion not to screen when you have this pressure from the public, from outsiders, to screen. It's not easy, and it's amazing how much
The chief scientist got involved in.
They don't get involved in these issues. They don't get involved in these issues. They're more on the wider global, the wider national issues. But this is a little issue, but has been a huge problem.
Catherine,
now,
can you say, when you say it's a powerful group, do you mean it's powerful just because the media support it and there's lots of needy individuals, patients,
yes,
relatives, or is the scientific advice
absolutely,
in the group?
It's a very powerful group, and I think that this highlights something I think is so important which we ignore. We talk about the scientific evidence, but the anecdote is incredibly powerful. If I show you a picture of a baby with severe disability, we must screen. That's the immediate reaction. The anecdote is very powerful. Look at the issues around fracking and things like this. Look how the public respond. And I think sometimes we don't try and tease out and find out why. If you have a baby who dies and you think that it could have been prevented, you will fight for it. And they have a huge influence on the media, there's no question about that. But it's not just, they often can, the anecdote can often shape the attitudes of the public, politicians, even the professionals, the pharmaceutical companies. It has a very wide range. The good example of that was the scare about MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine and autism. It's exactly the same process. And it happens, I think, much more than we really appreciate or realise. So I think that that is important. And this can result very strong protracted resistance to policies based on the best available scientific evidence. It's not really about the best scientific available evidence.
Can I pick up on something?
Sure.
When you talked about the MMRI, it's actually the opposite process occurring, because the best scientific evidence was to vaccinate with MMRI, and the public then panicked over scandals rather than reality, while what you're talking about is the scientific community here says it shouldn't be done, but the public wants it to be done.
Yeah, it's the other way around, but it's the power of the anecdote in seeing an adverse effect of something, which makes you not do it exactly. So really, so what I want really to conclude is by saying that policy to practice sounds very straightforward, but there may be an impasse where the evidence conflicts with conviction, and I think that's very important. The impasse may result in costly, time-consuming attempts at resolution, and that's certainly been the case. At the moment I'm chairing a group which is looking at the issue from a modelling perspective. The group are doing a lot of modelling. We're trying to feed into the models what the implications of that would be. And the dilemma, on the other hand, and I think we need to turn everything around and always be positive, the dilemma could stimulate novel attempts to find new solutions based on advances in basic science. And I would like to, going back to the talk we had about the complex systems, I would have liked to see something like that analysed in the context of the bigger picture. For example, the worldwide problem of antibiotic resistance. That's a huge problem. And are you going to give 25% of your pregnant women intravenous antibiotics when you can't really tell which ones are at risk? I think that's worrying, because it really is a serious issue. And I think the other area, which is an area which is just becoming to the fore, is the microbiome. It's a new field of the microbial population. And if you give antibiotics to a newborn baby, you alter the whole microbiome of its intestine. And there's work to suggest that that microbiome could influence the early development of the immune system and in fact be related to diseases in later life. There's some quite good work coming out. So that's a whole new area. And in order to analyse the microbiome, and what you might do if you knock out just one organism, will it be replaced? What does it do to the microbiome? These are questions that you can't balance when you do a simple risk-benefit, because you can't quantify that risk. But if you could do it in a bigger picture, I think it might be very interesting. But the other thing is the genes, their influence on responses to microorganisms. That's another important part of the picture. How could we build all that in? And different countries do different things, sometimes quite sensibly, because the problem is different in different countries. And in some countries, they would say screen, like they do in the States. But the States screen, and they have the same level of infection that we have without screening. So it's a different issue. So I'd like to end up with that, and really try and put it into the bigger context of analysing it, looking at the future as well as the present.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, thank you. No, it's very, very, very interesting that in 2006, if you just finish it, President Museveni was here, and we had this think tanking where, again, but it was a think tanking rather than a kind of exposure to various things. And he was very keen on the, if you remember, the foresight work which was presented to G7, G8
Yes.
on infectious diseases.
I saw
Was
the
there-
nanotechnology coming in today.
Was there anything that has been followed? If you try to reflect a little bit what has happened since 2006,
Well,
with that
what always
in
strikes
the
me
global-
is when you look at the future, you're really just looking at a few years ahead. It's very
So
hard
that's
to
about
actually
7
look
years.
at the future. But I think there has been huge development, particularly in areas around the point-of-care test and the use of telephone for sort of processing results and networks there. So I think a lot has happened. It's been quite slow, but it has happened, and it's certainly being applied more in Africa probably than it is in developed countries.
Yeah. There was a question at that time also.
It has, yes.
What would the chief scientist or science advisors within a civil service context have to do with progressing the recommendations which were made to that? So I don't know what that happened, but
Well, there were several reviews looking at what had happened from it as a result of it, which were quite interesting because it did have a huge impact, particularly looking at the one world, looking at animal and human health together. I think that this was the most powerful thing that probably came out because the issues are very, very similar.
okay. No, thank you very much. So that's thank you, Catherine.
It's a very
So we maintain the same again thread for a number of years, so that we do get to understand more about how infectious diseases of one kind or another, including the Ebola that he was mentioning about, but flu and all sorts of other things that are taking place.
Yes, I
But
think huge amounts of change.
the whole point was, how did the science advice adapt it to the various the management or the advice in itself within a civil service to this growing global panics?
I think it's
Do you
very
think
difficult.
our chief scientist?
Well, I think it's very difficult. For example, with all the pressure coming, and the civil servants are asked why did we screen, or the politicians, they don't understand the science. And it's very, very hard for them to come up with any solutions. So they come back to the evidence, and you know, their response is back to source. But it's very, very hard for all the civil servants to understand the detailed science behind some of the decision making. I think that's too much to expect. So
Well,
the chief scientist has a huge role to play in bringing it all together.
That was.
There are actually two levels, right? There's the fact that the civil servants don't understand, but also the standard epidemiology is still limited in its
Very limited.
tools for the
Very
ability to do it.
appallingly.
That's right.
But then you have to marry two types of criteria, do you not? One is the scientific evidence, and the other is the cost. I mean, there's been a lot of debate here about when there's a new drug, which can be quite effective, right?
Well, yes.
But the number of people for whom it might be effective
Yes.
has to be measured against what that money could be used for.
But that's a political
That's
decision.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
another
absolutely.
layer of-
But at some point, you've got to find a way of marrying up the scientific evidence with the political judgment. Yeah.
But this
Could
is
I-
even a step before that. The scientific evidence was such it wasn't worth doing an economic analysis.
Well,
So it's
if
based
we-
on science, not money. Although people would interpret that it's money, not science, that stopped it.
I'm wondering if PS, Mr. Bowden, do you think that the big, intensive smart partnership type of process that you all initiated in Namibia to penetrate all the parts of the system in the country and within the government, do you think that would allow the National Commission for Science Technology, and by de facto those who are kind of advising the President's office and the whole system, do you think that will, I mean, you were talking very much about smart networks at that time.
I asked him when he presented and whether there was a possibility of replicating their experiment here with universities in other parts of the world, because in my view the critical mass of energy is at that level of universities, and students are within the grassroots level so much that their voices and their findings can assist the national policy makers to see the future horizon other than those of us who are growing towards retirement, who have no further futuristic aspirations, being the role players, particularly in influencing national policy.
Well, what's happening in Barbados, Anta? The chief scientific advisor who may deal with, is there, who is dealing with that function currently? The Prime Minister and the Cabinet and so on.
Chief scientific advisor.
I mean, we were discussing about the Bureau of Standards playing quite an important role within the context of innovation and science, even probably more than in the absence of a function of a chief scientific advisor within the civil service. There is a National Commission for Science, but that doesn't necessarily.
In Barbados, a few years ago, they were looking at developing a national policy on science. But then we had a change of government and we had a council, science and technology, and that moved from one ministry that is now in the Ministry of Education. And that seemed to have taken a, the back burner kind of thing. So there hasn't been a lot of activity recently in promoting and developing that science policy. The focus at home now, well, there's a lot of talk about entrepreneurship and innovation, but they are looking at it from the perspective of, say, driving the economy as opposed to recognizing the importance of, or the role that even standards and science and technology can play in that whole
No,
process.
come on, but how many times were you able, without necessarily being appointed from the Bureau of Standards in Barbados, how many times were you able to actually have to, not only being able to, advise on one kind of technology or another within the ministry? Many times.
Well, yeah, in terms of, they do ask for advice, and whether they act on advice or not is another matter. But they do involve, standards and science and a whole lot of things. Years ago, but you see, this is the thing, because the focus has shifted, because maybe like 10 years ago, the National Council for Science and Technology was very involved in, like, even at the schools level, a program we used to have, like, science exhibitions and a lot of new ideas, innovations.
Well, I'm just wondering, Dante, we were discussing about Bureau of Standards not only in Barbados but everywhere else, and Sierra Leone, Lonkosi and so on. There are quite a number, the same is in Namibia, a number of key scientists of one kind or another in a country like Namibia and so on. They're actually captured by the Bureau of Standards, rather than having to go into or being picked up by the civil service. In Namibia, in fact, one of the crystallographers that the Bureau of Standards had is now Chief Executive National Commission of Science. That doesn't mean necessarily that he is being called on together with groups that he might have to advise the government, the president's office. But since there is a new government, where is Dr. Woro? Probably that might be able to be, what do you think? How many chemists do you have?
But in terms, at home, in terms of the Standards Bureau, we usually hire persons with scientific backgrounds, but nationally.
No, but what we're saying is in a small country, small content, you cannot afford to have them just involved on a technical matters in Bureau of Standards. Because if you go along, Kosi knows, we went there and she knows. She has some of the best people in Swaziland. Zungu will tell us a bit about it. So there is a question how to leverage that kind of existing
in a
capacity.
developing country, they're not looking at science advice, they're looking at financial advice.
Yeah, the challenges are science and
No, it doesn't. But if, for instance, the Prime Minister of Barbados wants to be, and there are many situations we were put in, called in, and we said there are people in Barbados wants to know, like, now, there is science advice from within the island provided.
But you know, there's specialized areas. I mean, right now the policy at home is about smart green energy,
that's,
you know, that kind of thing. So from that perspective, they would probably engage science at that level. But I don't think they.
You seem to be saying that because they're scientists, they should be used for advice in other domains.
No, they are not scientists. They are already in the system. Once they are in Bureau of Standards, we have a long discussions about this, to try to find out in what way, in a country where there isn't actually within the structure of a government, with the exception probably maybe in the universities, but also in Bureau of Standards.
Is this any different than when you're talking about
So how do we get
your Death Valley scenario? Because what it seems to me that what you're talking about is you've got scientists embedded in the government institution, and you're saying that they have dual functions. Well, if
They
you're-
could,
if you're-
exactly.
Yeah, they could.
They
But
could.
what you're also telling me is that it seems to me as if you want the university sector to start moving into the Death Valley, what you're asking academics to do is take on a dual role. And if you start taking on that dual role of academic and businessman, you're in a conflict. It seems to me as if you're asking academics almost to create a conflict of interest.
Actually, this is what is fascinating in Manchester, by the way of this graphene. Ivan, what do you think?
I don't think you'll ever get academics moving into the Valley of Death.
So who's occupying it?
It's the whole ecosystem, it's the whole structure. It's driven primarily, that bit in the middle, by the end user, okay? Industry at the end.
Okay. So what is the Graphene Institute in Manchester?
It's scale up. So how do you get
Scale
from
up.
that academic, I can make this, but I wanted this,
Yeah,
okay? That's a big step.
I understand
So
that.
an academic will only be interested in this.
Academics are very specialized, right? So
Yeah.
you don't want a chemist to be doing psychotherapy or deciding on public policy
Well,
about
that's what
education.
Well, could I bring Goma in? Because we've been discussing about this many times from Grenada. You remember, right at the beginning, Len.
Just what Omar just
Grenada.
said. Let me just say one thing. The experience what we found in the UK with this Valley of Death in the middle. Academics find it very difficult to do projects. They're the worst project managers you can find.
Oh, without doubt.
Okay? And that's not the key part of that bit in the middle. It's the 8%.
It's 80% of business that come in.
Yeah.
So
That's the other one. That's why it's so important that you have industry engineers there leading it rather than academics.
Actually, there was a reason why I was trying to bring that in, because in Malaysia, Omar did mention about history, he wanted to relate to the future. Might, and Yusuf is here, a structure within the government evolved specifically to catch these few people who exist, both in private sector and within various government departments in university, and brought them together into what is called Malaysia Industry Government with High Technology. And that was an ability to provide both advice, but also to implement, to push through. Yusuf, can you say a few things about MITE?
Yeah, I think...
Yusuf is the chief executive of...
Thank you, ma'am. I think when you look at science advisor's role, I think you need to look at two perspectives. I think one is if the leadership is very, very clear about the role of science in the country's development, then it will be an easier task to advise, to make that advice. But I think as a country like Malaysia grows, it is bringing up a lot of issues in order to make sure that that growth has that momentum. And I think in the past few years, what has become very apparent in countries like Malaysia is the survival. One, in terms of its economic strength, and two is that how this economic population is actually shared among all the population. So it's not enough for Malaysia to be wealthy. We're talking about average just now. It's also to know where this wealth is actually going to. And being a country separated by the South China Sea, you may see that the wealth creation is not actually equally distributed. So you need to put a lot of energy and a lot of resources into making sure that these wealth are equally distributed. And that actually brings about less science and more economics and more social elements into the policy making. So somehow the scientific community may feel a bit left out in that decision making. But once it's stabilized, then you find that there will be more questions about science helping in the future growth of the country. Somebody mentioned about green, emerging technologies, and now the country is looking more into the science part. And it sees that not only that science can develop wealth, but also science can help to solve many of the issues in the rural areas. So the scientific community is now being welcomed into the system. But the science advisor is as strong as how the institution that supports it. It is not a one man's job, but he relies on the whole ecosystem to help him to make that advice. I think President Omar makes that point. Is that advising channel very clear or not? I think that has to be developed by the person. But he has to have very strong resources behind him to make the best advice. And in the case of Malaysia, I think once the science advisor has achieved a certain position in the ecosystem, he may be called for to give advice beyond science. And that institution that he represents, whether it's whether an organization like MIND, or whether it's like a professor council of the university's professors, and whether he's anything to do with the Academy of Sciences, that would actually develop the kind of expectation of his kind of advice. So in the case of Malaysia, the science advisor is now being called to do more than science, advising science, because science by itself is not useful. Science relating to education, science relating to social development, science relating even to political elements is now very, very key. So you see a wholesome role of the science advisor, I think nowadays calls for beyond just science.
Alan, thank you, Yusuf.
Yeah, I was burning to make a remark because the subject of standards has been brought up by several of these presenters, and I wanted to underline the role of international standards as a source of economic and scientific intelligence for both for governments and the private sector. Because what we have been witnessing in the past 10 years is that innovative technologies tend to reach the international level of standardization even before they have gone through the national level. So that if you look at the most recent technical committees in ISO, IEC or ITU, you will find all the subjects that we have addressed this morning and many others. And many of these subjects are taken up at the international level because of time to market necessity. So that we don't have time anymore to first start with national standards and then produce European standards and then international standards. Because time to market is to be shorter, you need to work at the international level straight away. So that the international standardization system becomes a source of scientific and economic intelligence that can be drawn upon through the national standards bodies. And this is one of their main important functions, is to monitor what is happening in these organizations to which they take part. Not necessarily to take part in the technical work, but to monitor the trends. And so if you take the subjects we presented this morning and a few others that were presented before, like big data, like 3D printing and that sort of thing, you will see in ISO, IEC and ITU technical committees which have been formed recently on these subjects. And if you look in the business plans, if you look in the justification studies, because these organizations do not create technical committees without a justification studies. When you look which countries are behind, which companies, who is taking part in the technical work, then it's a source of scientific and economic intelligence. So I just wanted to underline this aspect, which is it's a cross-cutting remark, because international standardization is now done straight away, not passing. And another element which is important is that the process takes into account the intellectual property and patent aspect, because in many of the technologies we are talking about, there are patent aspects, and therefore the dissemination of technology through interoperability, through testing, measurement, etc., is compatible with the protection by patents. There is a patent policy shared by the 3 international organizations, and this is a very important issue because dissemination of new technologies is usually associated with patented technologies.
Alan,
so
that's obviously a source of intelligence on technology as we go along, including all these other aspects. But the question we're dealing with, within the structures of government as we have them now, if Cabinet Secretary Mbuso were to say, I know that ISO has available some intelligence on this and that, how does he get that? Would he go to Lomkosi, to the Bureau of Standards?
Well,
how would he do it?
The Bureau of Standards has, as a member of ISO, access to all the documentation, the background to the creation of new technical committees, and the current status of work.
We know what ISO has, but the question is, I am in Swaziland. Zungu, you are head of SP Hub, you're also scientist. How would you interact with, and you are in Prime Minister's office, down this corridor. You're not a science advisor, you're not very far from Cabinet Secretary. Now let's talk about real situations actually, because there is a lot of wisdom and intelligence and all the rest of it available. The question is how to make these systems happen. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, well, my concern was starting from the National Graphene. My concern was coming from the National Graphene Institute, where,
in UK.
Yeah, in the UK, where we've seen that the universities are now venturing further into the value of data. Now, is this a function of, how much is this a function of national policy? Or can it be replicable to other areas like nanotechnology? Or is it because it is generated by the enthusiasm generated by graphene at the moment?
That's one question. But you didn't answer about Swaziland. You are down the corridor of the Prime Minister. No, you have to. You are not very far from Buso's door, his Cabinet Secretary. So, and she is not very far, the Chief Executive of Bureau of Standards. Where you two now go back and say there is some potential on graphene or on whatever it is that you have.
I think you're missing a point.
Not on research.
I think you're missing a point here that academia is only one part of the puzzle. In fact, the key part of the puzzle is the industry, and we haven't talked about it, and I haven't mentioned, they are key. They are the ones that pull this through into actual jobs, investment. They are the ones. Academics won't do that.
So the point was, and that's why I brought in Yusuf, not to make a case for science advice, but how does that science advice function, which is built within the civil service for so many years in Malaysia, down the corridor of Prime Minister, connects with the pull from the industry? And there is where a MITE type of network comes in, for instance, but there are different situations. How do we do it in Swaziland?
Yeah, well, it's a question of actually crafting policy to actually help facilitate this kind of relations to bridge the gap between industry and academia.
Well, if you leave it to policy, I don't know who's implementing it.
It's about recognizing that we need all the parts to craft the policy.
Yeah, I wanted to support what Alan was saying, that the National Standards Body is actually a source of information for anyone who would need information about anything, especially in anything that is standardized.
Are you flashing that I have information? and
No,
people
no, no.
come to you.
I always say it in Swaziland in my speeches and in my publications that we are a sort of we are the source of the latest information on technology, especially. And I'm just confirming what Alan has said. And as the presentation was made this morning about the three mountains of academia, the Dead Valley, and then industry, I was trying to place the national standards body, and I placed ourselves as a bridge in that valley of death, because as R&D is happening in academia, we have the responsibility as a national standards body to capture that information and encode it in a standard as a foundation for future developments of that technology. And then industry can access that information at the national standards body, which gets information from ISO.
Okay. Omar, can you round up? There is one other charity. Sorry.
Oh, thank you.
You're in Agricultural Research Center.
Yes, but I would like to ask a few questions related to what you said, because we are here to learn how we can maybe influence decision making for the benefit of many. Like in the case of Botswana, we don't have, we've had a science technology policy at draft stage since 1998, and it was reviewed, that draft was reviewed in 2012 without having been implemented. And in the process, there have been other things that came up. The government came up with different kinds of hubs, health hub, education hub, diamond hub, and innovation hub, and so forth. And you find that when it comes to issues of scientific advice, things are fragmented. It's not clear as to how the government harnesses all these fragmented bodies of knowledge for the benefit of the country. So I just wanted to find out what's the best way to go about it. Because if you say come up with policy like Moses was saying, policy even in the case of Botswana, like I said, it existed at draft stage for more than 10 years. Because the government's will maybe is not there to embrace that science technology policy. So what would be the best way to ensure that there is scientific advice within the government structures? The other thing that I wanted to touch on is the issue of leveraging technology for socio-economic transformation. We talked about how nanotechnology can be the answer for countries like my country, which doesn't have adequate water supply. Maybe when it comes to reuse, water reuse, and also when it comes to, I was interested in the attire, the clothing that doesn't need to be washed more often. That could help us in a situation whereby we have a limited water supply. But the issue of access, the issue of affordability, I mean, to what extent is this technology inclusive? And also when it comes to access, especially if I refer this to, I think I remember I'm very much interested in the issue of prediction of conflict, riots, and so forth. And you see that all around the world we have hotspots, and we have this compelling way of predicting this. If you have the ability to predict, I think you have the ability to prevent. The question is, how is this accessible to everyone around the world?
Okay, well, I suppose we do need to eat and think. And I'm sorry, Yanir, over the dinner, the lunch, we can continue, Yanir, to explain to everybody what you just asked. But the question of, if we go back to the science advice process rather than scientific advice, is quite intricate actually. And we're trying for a number of years to say that within the structures we require not specialists, we require that sort of function that connects or stimulates smart engagement while aware of the policies that are interacting themselves and all the rest of it, not very far from the Prime Minister or President's office. And that is something which an innovation hub or science policy doesn't do. And it was very intriguing in the last few months to hear that His Excellency President Zuma was very keen on smart partnership and smart engagement, and that's why he wanted this dialogue there. And they do not have a science advisor as such, a function. They have a national NACI, a national, what is it called, Malcolm?
Research Foundation.
Research Foundation and a number of other things. But there is also a president of the South African Academy of Sciences, so that we are very much in touch with him. But actually, not among the advisors which are in all that in Pretoria, yeah, economic advisor, then one, there is not one of them who is assigned not just on science, but just in case something comes to be discussed and not on science, but on something which might have something to do with science.